this couple were getting divorced, and they were at the court, and the judge was saying to their little 10-year-old boy, well, who do you want to live with, your mother or your father? And he said, I don't know. Do you want to live with your father? No, he beats me. Do you want to live with your mother? No, she beats me. Well, who do you want to live with? The Indian soccer team, because they never beat anybody. It's not true anymore, though. Now they have a good team.
And it was the Indian cricket team.
Cricket team.
Soccer is okay, but cricket,
Well, I didn't want to tread on any sensitive issues.
Yeah, that's like threatening religions.
Right. So we chose a neutral thing like soccer. Okay, so now you have to do the work because you have to think of questions. Okay. I'll repeat it and you can answer.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's a real nice division of labor, isn't it?
It's sort of like that lady on Galaxy Quest who whatever the computer says, she repeats. Okay, so our friend asked the question that very often she wants to come to maybe an inspiring event or some spiritual gathering, but then this kind of wave of unworthiness comes over her that, well, maybe I shouldn't come or I'm not good enough. And how do you deal with that?
Okay, this is actually a very important question, and I'll answer it a little more broadly. But unworthiness, the sense of unworthiness has different layers to it, and all of the different tendencies that we have different layers to them. So think through the many, many, many incarnations we've had. Every thought, every action, every emotion that you've ever had resides not in your mental, your brain subconscious, but in the subconscious, one can say, hard drive of the astral spine. And so you carry all of that memory with you from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. And so somewhere in relatively recent lifetimes, perhaps in this lifetime, you have had, the input that you're not a worthy person, and you've bought into that. So, it's very common for children, for teachers, for people who are in power and are not secure in themselves to try, as Sri Yukteswar said, to try to make themselves seem taller by cutting off the heads of their enemies. So it's very, very common that people demean other people. Now, until you're secure enough in yourself, you buy into that. And so whatever feelings of unworthiness you have is a past tendency or samskar from past lives, and you will in fact quite often, so I'm broadening this, she's dealing with the sense of unworthiness, but others might deal with anger or jealousy or any of a huge gamut of negative emotions. That's why in the Bhagavad Gita, there were 5 Pandavas, and they were facing 100 brothers. So the 5 Pandavas represent the 5 chakras, and Krishna is the 6th. The 100 brothers are all of these emotions. King material desire is at the top of them, but one of them will be unworthiness, and lust, and anger, and greed, and all of those. So everybody is facing those samskars from the past. But what has happened in your life is this particular one is a life test or something that has risen to the surface. So that's why you're facing it. And how to overcome it, that's why I say there are levels to it. See, you can overcome it in a relatively superficial way by overcoming it as a personality trait. And so you could go through a whole psychotherapy to find out that you're not unworthy and that your parents shouldn't have treated you that way and so on. And I don't want to put down therapy because it can be very, very helpful. But I'm saying that generally works on the level of the personality or the ego and the bundle of self-definitions. Ultimately, the ego itself is insecure. And there will be a sense of unworthiness of the ego, but it'll be a kind of a elevated spiritual unworthiness. This little aside, but we had a man who, we gave a Bhagavad Gita course many years ago. We had a man take a week-long course, and he had a very nice sense of humor. And so at the closing circle, we were going around, and he
sharing what we had gotten out of the course.
Sharing what we had gotten out of it. And he said, I'm still really confused, but at a much higher level. And so you can resolve unworthiness on a personality level, but it still won't pull out the roots of that. The roots of that go down deep into the delusion of ego and delusion of separation from God. And that's what the spiritual path is giving us tools to work on, because you won't kill the tree by lopping off a branch or plucking a leaf. You'll kill the tree eventually, or the noxious weed eventually, by getting the root out. And so our spiritual path will help us deal with that. Fortunately, the spiritual path, as you get deeper into your own self, we also tend to resolve those issues that are personality-based. And people become more secure in themselves. They become less angry. There are, many, now science is backing it up. There are brain changes that work with this, all kinds of things. But the spiritual path will eventually resolve those issues both on a personality level, but much more importantly on a soul level.
And I'll just add, there are two, again, using the analogy of the Bhagavad Gita, there's the forces, where our house divided. That's why Krishna says, and Krishna's dilemma, that's exactly what you're going through. Arjuna's dilemma, when he looks and says, I can't fight against these people. They're my own people. I can't reject this sense of unworthiness. It's such a big part of who I am, who I've grown up to be. And so, and the whole of the Gita, rest of it is Krishna explaining to Arjuna, this is just, it's only energy, this flow towards unworthiness. And in fact, Swami said once very powerfully, he said, anything that diminishes your sense of self-worth is satanic. Simply as that. And so for any of us, when we start feeling I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough, I'm damaged goods, whatever it might be, you just think, Satan, get thee behind me. Because if I don't resist you, and again, Swami said so wonderfully, he said, whatever you're struggling against, Master said, I don't ask you necessarily to overcome. I only ask you to resist. And so when those diminished feelings of self-worth come, just say, I will resist this. Maybe it will haunt me, but I will resist it. That's what I can do, because it's coming from a darker consciousness. And in doing that, bit by bit, you uproot the karma that brought whatever circumstances into your life that made you feel diminished, and you don't have to go there anymore. But if we don't resist it, we draw it to ourselves again and again. So,
and I'll give you two specific ways of fighting it. One is, when you come on a person who's feeling unworthy, be a minister to those people. Make them feel worthy about themselves, not so much on an egoic level, but that they are loved, they are cared for, they are cherished, and help them get a positive flow of energy. then for yourself also, find an affirmation or two that fight against, look in Master's
Either Swami's healing affirmations or
Right.
Master's scientific healing affirmations.
right, right, or a prayer from Whispers from Eternity, and memorize that. And when that feeling of unworthiness arises, think of it as a waveform, and that's dipping down. And so you want to neutralize that by putting the waveform that's the opposite of that. That's the way the Bose noise canceling headphones work. They analyze the waveform and they generate the opposite, and it deadens the sound. So this is the feeling. You generate the opposite of what that feeling is, and it will neutralize that quite quickly. And then finally give it to God. Ultimately, that's all we can do.
So other questions?
You're probably frightened from the...
Raghu.
Why can't we work out our material karma in the astral world? Well,
Because we're not satisfied. You know, astral, you know, when you, well, the reality of it is we can't work out our material karma in the material world. So, you know, because it never fulfills us. But, you know, that's why Swami has said if someone is, let's say an alcoholic, and then they die, they want to come back to the world right away because the subtlety of the astral world will not fulfill those material desires.
also, Master said that the astral world, for anybody that's at all advanced, and that would include everyone here, is so pleasant that you don't want to work on things. It's a little bit like going to Hawaii and taking your office with you.
The land of the lotus eaters.
Yeah. And so it's too pleasant. But so we will reincarnate as long as we have any of those tendencies that need to be worked out. Even after we become Jivan Muktas and we don't have an ego, we won't at that point create further karma. Actually, that isn't quite right. Swami gave an interesting variation. He said, Master said that even a master creates karma. But there's no ego for that karma. A master will create only good karma. There's no ego for that karma to come back to, so it comes back for the benefit of his disciples. And so even at the level of having no ego, we may have old past karma or those tendencies that need to be resolved. And Master said to Swamiji that you have to go through all your past lives when you were, pick a material desire, when you were desperate to become the richest billionaire in the world. And you have to go through that, and you have to see from the higher level, that was only God playing that through you in that form, and that desire was never really yours. And you untangle it and you release it. It was only you in a dream, and you release it. But he said you have to go through all your past lives and release them. And great avatars actually hold on to a few of those things, so it forces them to reincarnate out of the astral plane onto the physical plane so that they can help people.
But Swamiji, for example, hold on, Michael. You know, he was so obviously a king or a prince in many lives. And there was just this sense of both humility and simplicity, but of nobility in the highest possible sense around him. And everything around him, his environment, his homes, the things he owned, were always just lovely and beautiful. And once, some of you know, Master's wonderful disciple, Kamala de Silva, she wrote Flawless Mirror and Priceless Precepts and spent many decades in a close association with Master. Well, at the end of her life, she was afflicted with Alzheimer's, and there was no one to care for her, so we brought her to Ananda village, and we're caring for her. And we took her to the Crystal Hermitage, and we were showing her around. And she said, "Who lives here?" And we said, "Well, this is Swami Kriyananda's home." And she said, "Oh, he would take a room in a place like this." Anyway, so, well, Michael had. What tips do we have about how to tune into guidance?
No, this is, what tips do we have about how to tune into guidance?
You know, I feel really guided that you're supposed to answer this question.
I'm tipping. Okay, we'll both answer. This really, it comes into the question about how to develop intuition, because real guidance will come from intuition. But there are, again, kind of a stairway up to intuition. So intuition isn't just you go from level 0 up to the 10th floor. You gradually develop your intuition. The first and most important step is you have to want guidance. Because until you do, God won't intrude. God has given all of us free will. And so if you're saying, and it often isn't conscious, and especially among a devotee, it wouldn't be conscious. But how do we in fact say that we don't want guidance? We ignore God. We don't think about God. We don't meditate. We don't ask. And so in various ways, God doesn't mind our problems. He minds our indifference. And so we have to begin to ask for guidance. That's a step that we're capable of taking. So asking for guidance both in meditation and then during the day. I always end my meditations with, I mentally pranam to Master, and I end each morning's meditation with the deepest prayer I can have for perfect attunement for that day. And then during the day, I try to remember. Of course we forget. We get caught up in the busyness of life. I try to remember to ask for guidance. And so that asking is the first step. Then in deeper meditation, so the guidance is there. And often we already know what we should do. We just aren't ready to do it. So in meditation, when the mind is a little bit stiller and the heart is more open and we're more open, then if we can have, that's why Swami wrote that song, still your mind if you want to pray, still your heart if you want to pray, still your soul if you want to pray. If we can get the vibrational rate of those aspects of ourself calm enough, then we'll hear the guidance that's already there. And so it's not like, somebody, I think it was a story with Master where, anyway, somebody was chanting really loudly, and Master said, "Why are you chanting so loudly?" "Well, you see, God is a little deaf." So God isn't deaf, we're deaf. And we're not only deaf, but we have the television blaring all the time, and he's whispering. And so you have to try to calm a little bit. And the less committed to something you are, the more likely you're getting guidance. I mean, you can't pray, "Oh, I really want your guidance, Master, and please say this, this is what I want you to say. Why aren't you saying this?" So calm the mind and calm the heart, and actually mentally project the prayer for whatever guidance you're wanting from the spiritual eye, and then try to feel the response in the heart.
But looking at from the other end, it's a question that I've pondered because very often people come to us and ask advice. And it's a very interesting process. Their reaction, their response, what they do with the advice. Some years ago, I think Swamiji was training us, and he would have every Wednesday afternoon, I believe it was, he would have appointments, and people would come for counseling. And he would have Jyotish and I there, and we would bring, greet the person at the door, and then bring them to the room where Swami was counseling people, and then we'd sit there, and then we'd walk them out. But so often, someone would say something, just to simplify it, Swami, should I paint my house blue or green? And he would say, oh, paint it blue. And we'd be walking them out and said, oh, just what I wanted. Swami said to paint it green. And we said, that's the exact opposite of what he said. But often people will come to us for advice now. And it's curious because I often, but you feel they're asking the question, but they've already got their mind made up. And so Nayaswamis Jyotish, who's one of the directors over in India, he gave us some very good counsel. He said, when people come in and ask me for advice, I say to them, are you coming for advice or support? If you just want support, you have my blessings, whatever you want to do. If you want advice, that's a different conversation. But then Jyotish and I were talking, and I said, why? Because people will often come to us, and you can tell very immediately if they're really asking or if they're just telling you. And I said to Jyotish, why is that? Why is it that some people, they know they're not sure of what to do, and yet they've already made up their mind, and they're not really listening. And Jyotish said, it was very helpful to me, and it's something you can use for yourself. He said, if the karma is already fixed, they can't really ask the question. And that's exactly what it is. If the karma is not yet carved in marble, then they can ask and they can receive direction. But for most of us, it's already determined. So if you're unsure, really ask yourself the question, again, we come back to the Gita, why Arjuna asked Krishna the question, and it's a question for every one of us to ask, why do I do things that I know are going to cause me suffering? Because the karma's already, and Krishna's answer is, desire it is born of Rajaguna that forces you into that. But essentially it's Rajaguna is activated by our own karma. So if you feel just that, gee, I know I'm making the right decision here, but I can't seem to move in any other direction. Just as we were talking about neutralizing the energy of negative emotions, self-perception, try at least, if you know you're moving in a direction that's going to be self-defeating, to at least counter it. And then you begin to break down the karma. But it's a very helpful thought. When we can't take advice, it means the karma is fixed and we're not free to go in a different direction.
Swami, I'll just say this and then Nishkam. Swami gave a very, very helpful definition of good karma and bad karma, because people ask that all the time. Good karma is that which draws us toward God, and bad karma is that which draws us away. So winning the lottery, is that good or bad? Depends on whether it draws you to God or draws you away. Getting sick, is that good or bad? Getting a life-threatening disease, is that good or bad? Depends on whether it draws you to God or pushes you away. So, okay, Nishkam. Referring to Raghu's question about can we work out material karma on the astral plane, what if you're really, really determined? Then can you work it out on the astral plane? I'm not an expert in what you can and cannot do on the astral plane, but from the best of my knowledge, you can make a little bit of progress, but it's much more likely that you will simply get off that astral plane and back into the office or back into school as quickly as possible. So if you don't want summer vacation, you get right back into a class. And Swami used to tell this story about a man who had done a lot of tapasya, and so he was given a boon, and this deva appeared to him and said, I have been asked to give you the boon from God that you can go to the most beautiful astral plane. You're nodding because you've heard the story. Most beautiful astral plane, and you can go up there in your body form, which means symbolically that you don't lose consciousness between the physical birth and the astral birth, and that you can go there in your physical body and stay there as long as you want. And the sage said, well, tell me the advantages of it. It's beautiful, it's harmonious, everything you see responds to your slightest wish, everything is wonderful, there's no problems, and went on in this vein. And then the sage said, well, you know, I've always seen that there's always an opposite side to things. Tell me, are there disadvantages of the going to the astral plane? And the Deva said, well, there's really only one, and that's that you don't make progress there. And so the sage said, well, then I'll just stay here. So maybe you can make some progress, but you have the strong desire now to make that progress. Whether you will when everything is just wonderful or not is another question. So, but the soul will want to get done with the process. So, probably you'll incarnate quickly.
But in the Bible, Christ says, "In my Father's home there are many mansions," meaning in the astral world there are many lokas to go to, and I'm not an expert on the different mansions in the astral world, but you know what we read, probably the best description we have of it is the resurrection of Sri Yukteswar, and where he talks about the nature of the astral world and then the higher causal worlds where people can work out astral karma, they can work out causal karma, but it's almost a little bit like George Washington Carver, you know, asking God, why did you make the universe? And he said, that's too big of a question. Why did you make... Actually, we did a skit on this, I just am remembering. You all know the story about George Washington Carver. We did a skit at this at the 4th of July parade where George Washington Carver then says to God, well, why did you make the world? And God said, that's too big of a question. Well, why did you make humanity? Too big of a question. Why did you make me? Too big of a question. And then we twisted it, changed it, and then George Washington Carver says, oh, nuts. And God said, now you're onto something. So, anyway, okay, other questions. How do we let God act through us?
I'm not going to say it's too big of a question, it's the wrong question. How do we become aware that it is always God who is acting through us is the right question. So it's not a question of whether he's going to do that or she's going to do that. It's a question of when is the veil of ego going to get thin enough so that we're aware that it's God who is acting through us. So how do we thin that veil? Well, it starts by wanting to. Then you get an intellectual understanding that it's God doing this through you. And what that seems like to me is that every once in a while you remember, oh yeah, it's actually not me. And especially, I'll just speak from my personal experience, when I'm starting to whine, you know, about, oh, why do I have to do that? Why do I have, you know, all those things. When I start complaining a little bit, it's then that I intellectually remember, I'm not doing this. This is all God acting through a drama, and it's absolutely perfect. And just stop whining, Jyotish. And so I remember intellectually that it is God who is the doer all the time. And gradually, for my own self, my own experience, is that sense that God is the doer recurs more and more often and more deeply. And so, but I take that as just the thinning of the veil of ego, because it's always God. There's no other actor. So it's just becoming aware of that.
And I think the more we use the expression a lot, getting out of your comfort zone. The more you serve past what you think you can do, past what you want to do, past what you think is fair that you've been asked to do, the more you do that, the more you become aware. Because when you're running on empty, when you just say, I have nothing more to give here, and yet I'm being asked to do this, then it's only when the tank is empty that you're realizing that this is my experience, that you realize that God's filling it up. As long as you still got a tank of gas, you're going by your own energy, you think, oh, okay, I can do this. But then when you push past what you know you've ever done before, and then you start to get a sense, there's another energy coming in now, and it isn't me. I remember many years ago, I was first couple years at Ananda. Some of you may have heard the story. I was working up at the meditation retreat on the staff at that time. And this was the days, not even before computers, but before telephones. I mean, we had no way to communicate except through letters that people would be coming to stay.
And they had to chisel those in granite.
Okay, I'm going to do a little aside here. Once when our son was little, I was reading him a story, and he was very thirsty to get bedtime stories read to him. And so he said, one more chapter, Mommy, one more chapter. And so finally I said, when you grow up, you're going to have to read so many stories to your children to pay back all the stories I've read you. And he said, did your mommy read you stories? And I said, yeah. And he looked real puzzled, and he said, where did she get the books? And I said, what do you mean, where did she get the books? Well, weren't they real rare in those days? So, anyway, so we would get these chiseled tablets with people's reservations, and it was Spiritual Renewal Week, which we've referred to a couple of times. And it was the end of the Sunday night when people were checking in. Every cabin was given away. Every tent was given away. Every campsite. There were no more sleeping bags. It was done. And I was locking up the office. And it was, late, what time it was. And then I heard a car pulling up, and this man came on. He said, I didn't make a reservation, but I'm here for Spiritual Renewal Week. And I didn't know where to put the guy. And there was nothing to give him. I mean, I couldn't just say, sleep in your car. So I thought, well, I'll run back to my little trailer where I'm living, and I'll give him my sleeping bag and my pad, and he can just put it down somewhere. So I did that, and I gave it to him, and I just, for myself, just put a blanket down on my plank bed, and that was that. And in the morning, I saw Swami because he was giving the class, and he had no way consciously, rationally of knowing what had happened, but he just looked at me and he said, now you're getting the idea. And it was just like, you give away everything, and that's when God comes in. So to feel God's the doer, run as fast as you can, and then feel the wind in your sails. Okay, very good question, and probably many can relate to that.
Repeat it.
I will.
Oh, sorry.
Unless you want to.
No, I'll repeat it, and then you can answer it.
Okay.
So she's asking, for those people who are in service professions and rewarding service professions, but it's a very difficult task, and especially after a hard day, how can they kind of release from the energy of that day?
Well, there's many support groups and articles and books written about care for the care providers. Because, again, if you can impersonalize it and say, it's not me that's doing this, if I can be of any help to anyone, it's a higher consciousness, it's God that's coming through me. And so I have to protect and nurture that sacred fire or candle that is lit within my heart that wants to help people. Because if I just become overwhelmed by their darkness, I have nothing to give, and I can't help them. I can see many people who are medical doctors nodding, and so how to realize, and often people who are care providers, they're about the very bottom. Self-care is the very bottom of their list of priorities. I don't need help. I can keep going. I have to care for these other people, not me. But if you can realize, if you can come to the understanding that what I have to give is a sacred gift, and I have to do everything I can to nurture that. So take time to recharge. And I mean, you can, if you're new here, we have wonderful classes on yoga, meditation, stress reduction. These are real things. We talked with a group of people the other night. Ananda in India, some of our teachers were just asked to give a workshop on meditation, stress reduction, and energization to the Indian border patrol between China and India, which is a very high stress assignment, and a lot of depression. It's very isolated, very cold, a lot of tension. And so we went there, and we taught meditation and relaxation, energization to over 1,000 people. And so people in those kind of professions realize we need tools, or we can't keep doing what we're doing. And that's why there's, a lot of people drop out of being a care provider in social services because they can't maintain their own uplifted energy. Now I'm going to kind of bounce the question, and I'm going to ask Connie if you have anything that you can say, because I saw you nodding your head. She's a homeopathic naturopathic doctor. So is there anything you can share that you've learned in your career? Yeah, why don't you come up? Is that all right? Do you mind? Because it might be helpful just from somebody in the field.
I don't know if it's helpful or not, but I think what you said about using the tools that we have, for me it's not possible to go to work in the morning without meditating in the morning, for example. I just can't do it. I'm irritated from the very beginning. I can't sort of maintain a balance. And another thing that's very helpful is actually something that Shanti has said to me many times that she does, and that's to see each person as God who comes into the office. So if you can even take 2 minutes between clients to center yourself and bring yourself into that awareness of the relationship that you need to have with them, it's very helpful. In my case, I also just, I don't work consistently. I know my limits, and I can work very consistently for about 6 weeks, and then I really change it. We happen to have that healing retreat over in Hawaii, so I then rejuvenate in that way, and then I come back, and then I'm ready to do it again. But I think you need to know your limits, really, and you just always need to tune in inside of yourself and meditate when you come home. If you take even 10 minutes when you come home, it's really, really helpful. If you don't do that, I don't think that you can practice for very long.
One more thing I would add is at the end of the day, before you leave work, I don't know if you have a practice of praying for others, but pray for everyone you saw that day, and then close the door, and you don't take them home with you. You've given that person, their situation, their problems to God. Let God help them now. You've done what you can.
And find some activities that nurture you, that give you joy, because joy is the best antidote to. We were saying that, the energy that pulls us down is gravity, the energy that lifts us up is levity. find some things that provide levity for your life.
Okay, this may be zeroing in on the last question to Chandra. Okay, so we'll repeat the question. She said, we just said, do as much as you can do and then do more, but where's the joy in that? I think that's what she said.
What's the fun of that?
But if it's done with not tension, but with a sense of self-offering, that's the difference. The joy, self-offering is joyful. I'll just share this story, and it is what it is. Within the last few years, we were going through a real challenging period, and a lot was happening, and I was just kind of pushing past what I thought I could do. And then it was the end of a long day, and then a friend called. This was at Ananda Village, and she said, you know, my back just went out. I don't have any food in the house. It was about 6 o'clock at night. It was getting dark. Can you do something? And I had just walked in the door, you know, and I just said, sure, I'll be right over. I have a big pot of soup that I made earlier in the day. I'll bring you some food, you know. So got it, and I was driving over, and this is what happened. I was so overwhelmed by God's presence in that moment that I was just weeping. And I just was saying, thank you for showing me. I thought I was done. But when my friend needed help, there was more to be given. And so it's not like, you know, bearing down with grunting, you know, but it's just feeling that flow. And when we're in that flow, we never get tired. The Swami, you know, just, you saw that even in his later years when his body wasn't well. There was just that flow. It wasn't like, oh my God, one more talk. It was just, here I am, let me share with others. Does that help? Yeah. Okay, how did not reach the bottom?
What is it that makes us tired?
I don't know.
Lack of willingness. Master said that everything is a test of our willingness. The greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. So when we get tired, or when we've had a long, hard day, and I'm not trying to say this in condemning ways, because it's like a muscle that gets fatigued. Will actually gets fatigued. And so, but the answer is not more tension. It's simply to relax and find where the resistance to the flow of willingness is. And where there's, the greater the will, the greater the willingness, the greater the flow of energy. One of the fundamental laws that we learn. And so where there's subconscious or conscious unwillingness for something, and we push through in spite of that, then we get tired. But where we can overcome the tendency to, which is a natural tendency of the ego, to be unwilling, then the energy flow is there. And it's just, I don't have a magical answer.
Yeah, it's not a black and white formula,
Yeah.
you know, this much on this. It's not an equation. It's just your own experience. And again, the way Master has presented his teachings is that they're very experiential. Try it for yourself. Really, if somebody asks you to do something, say, no, I'm not going to do that, and see what it feels like. And another time say yes, and see what it feels like. So play with it and see your own experience of pushing past limits, not with a sense of grimness, but with a sense of just to see what the results are.
But you also have to recognize, even though here I've said it's a limitation on your willingness, you have to recognize, okay, I have a limitation on my willingness. Therefore, I need to rest a little bit.
Okay, one last question in the back. Okay, so do you want to repeat?
We're talking here about the process of dying and how that's the last test. Swami called it the final test.
Final exam.
Final exam. And she works with people who are dying, and a lot of times she sees resistance or fear or some difficulty in leaving the body. She wants to know how to help others go into the light, but almost more importantly, how to do that for herself and ourselves. So how do we work with that? I'll say a few things, and then Devi will, and then that'll be the end of the question and answer. The way we die in America, I know for sure, and probably most everywhere, is an extremely ignorant process. We really need a national campaign to prepare people for the leaving the body. We have a huge push, the cultural push to try to stay young, to try to stay pretty, to try, to act like you're a teenager, to get all the cosmic surgery and all of that. And people will not talk about death. Finally, there's a little bit more because some books are coming out. But it's a subject, by and large, that's completely avoided. And so it's like we're all going to have to go to that class, but nobody will study for the exam, except we're studying for the exam. But most people will not. They won't even admit that that exists. So we really need a whole change of the culture to prepare people in a better way for leaving the body. But it's one of those political subjects that can't even be touched. A few years ago, they wanted to have, there's a wonderful book called Being Mortal. And if you haven't read it, it really helps. It's talking about the aging and the dying process. They tried to have a law passed where through Social Security, you could at least, through Medicare, you could at least have a conversation with someone about what your wishes were for the last phase of life. But it was enormously political. Oh, the death squads, and finally it got passed. I think now you can have that conversation. It's extremely helpful to people if they have that conversation, because then at least their wishes are known for that process. But still, there's a huge amount of education that needs to be done. Basically, if you can, what you need to do, it isn't just fear. Fear is part of it, but it's unresolved issues, it is anger, it is nostalgia.
Attachment.
Yeah, attachment, all kinds of emotions are there. You need to try, if you can, if the person is at all open, to help them become more detached and to kind of clean up the loose ends. We've had a number of people pass at Ananda that we've helped with the process. And it can be a beautiful process. One woman comes to mind, and she had advanced cancer. She basically threw a party for the last 3 weeks of her life at the hospital she was in. But she called everybody that she had had any kind of difficulty with, and she made amends, or she had a conversation with them and told them how much she loved them and so on. And so she went through the dying process in that way. Another woman, very saintly woman, wanted to be completely alone. She wanted only 2 or 3 people that she would have contact with because she was withdrawing and preparing herself inwardly. But what I'm really saying here is that people are not very open, but for those who are open, try to help them release all attachments, release all sense of failure, all sense of anger or judgment toward people, the freer one is as they go into the final exam, the easier and better that will go. Now, we practice that while we're living. I mean, what we're really trying to do is go breathless, which is the definition of dying on the physical level. So we're trying to go breathless, but maintain consciousness while we do that. So we're preparing for the final exam, but even we need to make sure as we go into that end period that there aren't lingering regrets, lingering attachments, as much as we can to clean the heart. Then at the time of death, we almost always, in the room of the person for the last few days, we have softly playing Master chanting Om or Swami chanting Om, and that vibration is there. Master said at the time of death, hearing is the last sense to go, and so that you should chant Om in the person's right ear, and that will help them go into that vibration. But we just need to do what we can to the best of our ability, and we're actually developing a kind of a beautiful ministry within Ananda to help the aging process and ultimately the dying process. But Swami called it evening hospice.
So I'll just add a few brief thoughts. I remember when I mentioned earlier when I had received word that my father was dying, and I called Swamiji. I was back in the Midwest, and I just called Ananda, and Swami happened to answer. And I said, is there anything special I should do to help my father? And because he wouldn't have been receptive to me chanting Om in his ear or playing Om, he said, your love for him will be his bridge into a higher realm. So if you can pray for the person as they're, inwardly, silently. There was another story I read about a man that had a near-death experience. He was in a big car pileup, and he was dead for some period of time, and he felt his body going, his soul leaving his body, but then he saw this light coming out of another car that helped him in his journey, and ultimately it wasn't yet his time, so he came back. But he realized the light coming out of this other car was someone praying for him, praying for those who had been injured or killed in this accident. So by creating, you can create a bridge of light by your prayers, by your loving nurturing and attendance to these people, and that can help them. And for ourselves, when we sit in the stillness and silence of meditation, the bundle of self-definition, the cord that binds those little sticks, begins to loosen, and the little bundle begins to become looser until eventually I think it falls away. And so I think for us to remember that when we come to that moment of death, it won't be such a big transition. Most people don't have any other experience of themselves other than the body and personality. But through meditation, we have another experience of ourselves. We touch that eternal reality, and that becomes stronger and stronger as the body falls away. So, and then remember too, for all of us, Master said, he who remains faithful to the end, I or one of our other line of masters will be there to usher them into the astral world. So that's the grace of having a guru in our lives like Yogananda.